Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Mac Outdoors with Mia and Leah. We're happy that you're here listening to us today. Stay tuned because Leah is going to share with us some rifle shooting tips and ways to improve your shots, and we'll also talk about something fun you can do to get outdoors.
This summer, whether you're at the range or in the field, WSI Sports' Hypertech bamboo tanks, tees, and leggings will have you covered. Visit WSISports.com and use Leah's affiliate code LLCO10 for 10% off your purchase. All products are proudly made in the USA. WSI is bringing back pride in American-made clothing. Again, that code is LLCO10 for 10% off your order at WSISports.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Mac Outdoors podcast, where a dynamic mother-daughter duo share their adventures, tips, and advice. I am Mia, and I'll be accompanied by the one and only daughter, Leah. It is time to get to outdoors, hunt, shoot, and spend time with family and friends. Let's get this show on the road.
So Leah, last episode you talked to us about coaching a shooting team and rifle shooting. You also told us a little about the Smith & Wesson M&P 22. And this week, why don't we share with our listeners a little bit of the tips and training that you've been doing and how they can improve their rifle shots?
So, as I mentioned in our previous episode, I've been helping coach a young lady for the National High School Rodeo finals. They have a shooting event, a 22 rifle. And so I've been kind of coaching her, helping her improve her shooting, so hopefully she places while she's at nationals. And I've been struggling. I coach all kinds of different people, but sometimes it's harder than others, especially when I'm more of a shotgun person, and for me, rifle's not the strongest thing for me. So I was learning a lot. We actually went and shot yesterday, and she kept hitting all over the target. She was not any sort of consistent or any groups, anything like that. And so I had never done this before, but I made her try a bunch of different things to figure out why she was shooting all over the place.
And was she shooting from like a standing position, or what position did you guys start off with?
Yeah, so we started on the bench just to get a feel. And then we went to standing because that's her hardest one to do. She shoots fairly well kneeling and prone, but her standing was pretty awful at state. And so that's what we're focusing on. And so with her standing, she was all over the target, which I know I am always all over the target also.
Yeah, and I think that's true for a lot of shooters, that it's the least stable position. I mean, even in Hunter Ed, we talk about it, you have only 2 points of contact with the ground, and the rest is your muscles supporting the rifle. So I can see where you would have a hard time, or me, but also her, since she's, not shooting as often as you do.
Yeah, and I even noticed it for shotgun. I feel like I'm so much more steady, but I think it's because I'm moving all the time when you shoot a shotgun, whereas rifle, you're staying in one single position. And I think that's the hard part too, is with me being a shotgun shooter and being impatient. I just like to okay, I'm there, shoot. And I slap the trigger or I jerk it, and I will be all over the place. And I know she's the same way. So that has been a super big challenge for us to overcome with her.
So, and that's one of the things that I guess for our listeners, a number one tip that Leah's got here is don't slap the trigger when you're shooting the rifle. It's a thing actually in shotgun to slap the trigger. But with the rifle, you don't want to slap the trigger because it actually causes you to jerk the whole rifle and pull you off target. So that's a really important thing, is, slowly squeeze that trigger until you feel it break.
Yeah, and I think a good way to know if you're jerking it or not is continuing to follow through when you shoot. It sounds ridiculous for when you're just standing there, but I noticed when I was doing it yesterday, I was saying, okay, I'm there, and I would shoot, and then when I would settle to my original position, I was way to the left, every time, which means I was jerking it when I was shooting. And so that's a good thing, is to continue a follow through after you shoot, not just, okay, shoot, I'm done. It's more of a, okay, there I am, exhale, slowly pull your trigger, and then hopefully you're not going to move as much.
Yeah, and so follow through, you're keeping your eyes through the scope, looking at the crosshairs and seeing where they are when you finish your shot.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's something I think we talked about back in January when we talked about things at SHOT Show, and that phone scope mount that was the rifle scope mount, and how you could actually use something like that to film through the scope and see, you could slow that down and replay it and see what's happening while you're shooting. And for you, pulling to the left, that's something could also be in your grip. Something that I see long distance shooters do, and I've been taught at some of the long range classes, is to actually move your thumb around and up on the stock or the grip so that your thumb isn't allowing you to pull and twist toward your, whatever your trigger hand is. And since you're left-handed, you may be using that to kind of pull it while you're, if you're squeezing too hard with your thumb. So that's something I've seen people do, is move their thumb around up higher on the stock.
Yeah, and another one I had her try, this was a big experiment day for me as a coach and for her in her shooting, but she kept pushing to the right every time. And I think her arm, her support arm, she just relaxes and like pushes with that one a lot as well. And so what I had her do is wrap a little more where her wrist is completely under the gun rather than to the side. And that restricts you from wanting to push it away that way, as what I did it as well as she did it. And it feels awkward, and you're not putting your fingers in the way of anything, but you're just twisting your arm just enough where you're not going to start pushing it.
Yeah. So putting your arm like that, if you're rotating your arm to be completely under the stock, how are you supporting that arm? Is the arm just in the air and you're using your muscles to hold up the gun?
How I shoot, everyone's different when they do it, but when I shoot, I put my elbow just on my hip. I stick my hip out and rest it like that, because it's already unstable enough for just your 2 points, whereas if you can rest somewhat on solid part of your body, it'll be a little more stable.
Yeah, and so that's actually giving another point of rest, so your elbow's resting against your hip, and you're not having to just support the whole weight of the gun out there in the air.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I've seen you do that when you were younger and everything. And at first that looks a little awkward, but it really is a way to get your muzzle to be a lot more steady.
Yeah, and I think when you're shooting like that, there's a lot that goes into your legs as well. They're your 2 supports. And this was a big point that I helped her with yesterday, was that she was standing straight-legged with her knees locked, and you can see her swaying back and forth and back and forth. And shooting's a sport, so just like any sport, you have a ready position, and your knees are slightly bent. So that's what I had her do, was bend her knees, not exaggerating like a squat or anything, but just enough to where her knees weren't locked. And that keeps you from swaying back and forth, which minimizes your movement again.
So that kind of engages her muscles so that she's not just free in the air, standing there.
Yeah, that keeps it from, instead of like wanting to lean forward or backwards, that keeps your weight centered on your feet rather than too much on your toes or too much on your heels.
Yeah, that's a really, really good tip. What did she think of the stuff that you guys worked on? Did she like it? Did she shoot a lot better?
Yeah, we actually had a huge improvement with today. It seemed like, or yesterday, it was super productive, and we worked on, I had her experiment with everything, how she gripped it, as we just discussed. I also, with her legs, had her bend her knees, but as well as I made her try shooting with a closer stance, like shoulder width apart, and then I had her exaggerate and do a super wide stance and point her lead foot just slightly forward towards her target. And that made a huge difference by seeing what is more stable for her, and so she can realize what is comfortable, because that's the most important part, is you're going to shoot better when you're comfortable.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think you brought up something that's important for anybody who's shooting, whether it's a rifle or shotgun or a bow, is that it's kind of different for everybody. I've actually seen archers who keep a really close stance. I mean, one of my really good friends, he's a world-class shooter and he's a phenomenal hunter, and his stance, he's a really big guy, but his stance is maybe 10 to 12 inches apart, and it looks awkward, but I mean, he obviously proves that it works because he wins awards and trophies all the time. So I know there's a lot of textbook things, but then in the end, I think you do have to come down to what works for you.
Yeah, and that's what I told her, is something you wouldn't expect, that you wouldn't think would work, might work so much better for you than it did for me. And that's why I had her try everything. Just like shotgun shooting, I have a pretty narrow stance, and I use my core a lot more than I did when I first started shooting. So, and some people shoot just how they would shoot a rifle, with their feet farther apart, which when I shoot rifle, I have a wider stance, but when I go to shotgun, I'm more narrow. So
yeah,
it's kind of what works for everyone.
And maybe we'll have to discuss that in a future episode, the shotgun stance versus rifle stance and the positioning, because when I was up at a class a couple weeks ago, or actually already a month ago now, the instructor actually taught the new shooters a rifle stance for their trap shooting position. So stay tuned, listeners, and we'll talk about the goods and the bads of that kind of stuff. Well, everybody, I'm super happy that Leah's having fun instructing these young shooters, and I hope that you're getting some good tips out of this. These will be helpful not just for shooting targets, but also in getting shape for hunting. So keep them in mind. If you have any questions or ideas or any feedback at all, we'd love to hear it. And you can let us know on our social media outlets, and we'll give you those at the end of the show. Right now, let's stay tuned for a word from my friend Lloyd at Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey, this is Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, host of the Armed Lutheran Radio podcast, reminding you that the podcast you're listening to is a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. Check out all the great content at selfdefenseradio.net.
If you haven't heard of Armed Lutheran Radio, that's a show to which I contribute a little about 5-minute segment each week when I'm available and around. So you should check it out. It's kind of a fun show. They debunk a lot of anti-gun myths, or people who are using the Bible to kind of say that we're not allowed to have guns. So if you have time, head over there and check them out. As I said, kind of a fun listen. So while we're on break, I'm kind of sitting here laughing because Leah's got her binoculars out, staring out at her window. I'm guessing she must see some deer or something out there, and she's wishing that she was outside. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. Everybody needs to get outdoors, right? Why don't you tell us about something fun that you attempted to do? So Legit Outdoors is your photography business, and you were telling me about something that you were hoping to photograph yesterday. Why don't you tell our listeners about that?
Yes, so this was super exciting, which I wish it would have worked out, but the Northern Lights were reported to be able to see them in Montana, where I am currently living. So I was so excited to see these, because that's my dream, is to see these Northern Lights. And so we sat up. They were supposed to show up around 9 and go till 3 in the morning, which I did not stay up that late, but I sat there until probably midnight trying to see these lights. And the most I saw was a slight green tint in the sky, but I didn't actually see the big show that you see in all the pictures and all that fun stuff. So I was bummed about it, but it was so cool to be out there and looking at the stars and seeing the mountains and sunset. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I have never seen them either. I remember when we were on that bear hunt in Canada, we were hoping to see them, but it was a little early in the year. How do you know? I know you did some research on it. What makes them happen, and what creates them, or how do you know when you can go see them?
So it's all based on solar winds and how the sun is and the moon is. And it is a lot of scientific things. And so I didn't understand a whole lot of it. But for most of the time, they're only seen in Canada or up in that part. They're seen a lot in Iceland and places like that. And so for it to be seen in the States, in Montana and such, it has to be a giant solar storm, which they're rated kind of like a hurricane. So usually they're marked at a 0.3, but for a major storm, for us to see them, they're rated at a 0.5.
Oh, wow.
When it's a major storm, you can even see them all the way to Colorado, which
Really?
I looked at. Yeah, the map
No
goes
way.
all to northern Colorado. So they
Oh,
can
I
be
see.
seen if it's an extreme storm, but
Yeah.
that doesn't happen very often.
And what exactly is a solar storm? What does that mean?
I'm not 100% sure what exactly it is, but it's basically how the solar winds are and how the sun is, and just the force of the winds is kind of what I gathered from the stuff that I read about it. There's a lot to it, though. It has to do like with how the sun is, how the moon is, how the sky is, and it has to be a perfectly clear sky when it happens. So one little cloud, you won't be able to see it. So it's pretty crazy.
Wow. And so you guys, was it clear weather yesterday?
It was cloudy when the sun was setting, and then once it went down, it cleared up. So I was super excited because I was like, we're gonna get to see him. It's gonna be so exciting. And all we really saw was just kind of a green tint. It wasn't really much anything super exciting, but
yeah,
I tried to take a picture, but you couldn't really tell at all that there was green in the sky or anything. So,
well, dang it.
I guess I'll have to make a trip to Canada.
Canada or Alaska or Iceland or somewhere at a further latitude that's further north.
Yes.
Well, I think that's super cool. That's something fun to do, to get outdoors. And especially, I don't know how hot it is up there, but for me, that sounds like a really good thing because it's too hot during the day. So being out in the evening sounds like a good thing. It reminded me when you were talking about the sky clearing up, when last year, or a year ago, I guess, we went on that pack trip to look at the solar eclipse. And remember, we were so excited, and we went to the top of this peak where it's super cool, and it was going to be such a great place to watch the eclipse. And just as it got closer to time for the eclipse, the clouds just like rolled in. So we kind of got to see it, but then the clouds covered it, and then it was done.
Yeah, that was a bummer.
Have any of our listeners traveled anywhere far away to go and watch the Northern Lights or to watch any of these eclipses? We did have friends that traveled quite a ways to go watch that eclipse.
Yeah.
Tell me some other things that you think are fun to do outside, Leah.
Well, I have this girl that I'm shooting with where we have made plans that we're going to work out together. But for our workout, we're going to hike a bunch of the mountains around the town that she lives in. And it's super exciting for me because since I've been in school, I haven't really gotten to really get outside and go hike and enjoy the mountains.
Yeah.
I've only gone on short drives. So that's super exciting. I get to be outdoors and I get to see new places, and it'll be a lot of fun. I think hiking itself isn't that exciting, but when you're seeing a new place for the first time, I love it.
And I have to disagree with you because I think hiking is so exciting because I always find different things when I'm out on a hike. Even if it's the same place I've been before, I always discover either like tracks or stat or berries or asparagus or something like that. Like there's always cool stuff.
That's another good thing though, if you're hiking or wanting to just be outside, is up here, I'm going to get to pick huckleberries for the first time ever. And so I'm super excited about that because I never had them until I moved up here. And everything with them is so good. So I'm super excited to go do that.
Well, I'm super jealous because I haven't had them either. And when we traveled up there to help you move into your apartment, I saw all kinds of different huckleberry things. And it made me want to go and explore and look for some of those. So, you'll have to freeze some for me or something.
Yes. Also, with the getting outdoors, in one of our previous episodes, we talked about a couple cool apps that you can get, which will get you outside. So we'll put that episode in the show notes so you can know all the ins and outs of the outdoor world in the app. There's a good one.
We'll definitely add those to the show notes. That's a great idea. So getting outside, I think hiking is a great outdoor activity. Another one is fishing. We've been doing some fishing, and that I think is always fun. I know some people think it's boring, but I really enjoy hooking any fish. So I think that's a really fun outdoor activity.
Yes, and shooting. Shooting your bow is a perfect weather to go outside in the evenings or mornings. Midday is a little toasty probably everywhere, but going outside and shooting, enjoying some family or friend time.
Mm-hmm.
We shoot indoors, but we do shoot outside every now and then.
That's a great one. I've actually been shooting my bow every day. And as you said, I do it early in the morning before it gets too hot. Archery season's coming. It'll be here before we know it.
Super excited for that.
Well, for our listeners, if you have any tips on things that you like to do in the summertime to get outdoors, let us know. And we'll think of some more and share them with you in a future episode.
Well, that's all we have for this week. Thank you guys for tuning in again. We hope that you will reach out to us on our social media at Mia Anstein and at Leah_Huntress. And my photo page is legit.outdoors on Instagram, and I'm on Facebook. I'd love to hear your comments on either social media. We will see you next week.